thus fostering each other, you shall attain the supreme good. Okay, so this verse continues on from verse 10, and it's basically talking about a fundamental law of the world, so that no person can basically go on ahead on their, in their life alone. So a basic thing is, for example, if you want to go from the ground floor of a building to the top floor without an elevator, without a lift, you need assistance. You can't, climb to the top without anyone else's help. And even Krishna Bhagwan, who is a supreme being, the way he used to steal makhan, he used to steal butter from the top of I'm sure you guys have seen it on the TV, that he used to form like a pyramid. So 10 people at the bottom, and then 7, and then 5, and then 3, and then he used to go to the top. So even Krishna Bhagwan needed assistance from other people and cooperation. So what we need to consider is what happens if one of the people who was at the bottom said, why am I at the bottom, and why am I being put there? And therefore, being questioning why he's required, and why he's at the bottom. So if you sort of look at society, you need cooperation for even the basic things from everyone. So we have to question why Krishna Bhagwan said that, and he actually said that if you foster the gods, then by natural energy it automatically follows on that they will then foster you, as it says in the translation. So if you do something good for somebody, it automatically returns. That good energy will come back and they'll do something good for you. I mean, probably lots and lots of people have experienced that. And if you don't, if you don't do it, and you feel that even if you're doing good things for them and you don't automatically see the result, you will do, because it might not be today or tomorrow, but it will be in the future. So the existence goes on forever, and the good results will definitely come. So if we just look at the second word in the second word in the first line, pavayat, what does that actually mean? It means 3 things. The first thing is to think, the second is to meet, and the third is to do good. So when all of these 3 things together, combined, this is pavayat. When you think about others and you meet them and you do good to them, and the other person will think about you, they'll come to meet you and they'll also do good onto you. So if you do these 3 things to God, you will attain the greatest good. This is basically one of the benefits of the sacrifice that we saw in the previous verse. So Guruji's given an example of a story that when he was young, he used to ask his grandmother to tell him this story frequently. And as it is a characteristic of children, they often go to their grandparents and hear stories that they like, and they hear them over and over again. So there's one story that he wants to share with us. Basically, there were the demons and there was the gods, and the demons used to complain to God that God gives a lot of importance and that people give a lot of importance to the gods and not to the demons. And he wondered, they wanted to know why, because after all, they said, we're insulted that gods get all the worship, and ultimately we were descendants of God, so why is everyone and God being partial to us? So God told the demons that they have certain characteristics that they have that people don't necessarily appreciate, and that the gods have characteristics and good qualities which people would like to gain in their own lives, and therefore that's why they worship them. The demons said this is unfair, so they just weren't prepared to understand and refused to believe that there was a difference between them and the gods. So to make them understand, God said, okay, let's do this. I'll put you guys first. I'll put you before, the gods. And he arranged a massive banquet, and there was wonderful food everywhere. And there was, 1 or 2 conditions. And one of the conditions was that they weren't allowed to bend their elbows, so they had to keep their hands straight like this. Some people probably heard this story before. But basically, all the food was in front of them, and all the demons were around the table. But obviously, being their hands straight like this, they weren't able to feed themselves. So they started going like this, trying to feed themselves, but obviously realized that they couldn't. And, then started having a problem. They started banging their hands with each other, and they started arguing and fighting. The food that was the glorious banquet that was in front of them didn't reach anyone's mouths, and no one got a chance to savor this delicious food. So they started getting angry at each other, and within 15 or 20 minutes, they all started fighting and getting angry, and there was, blood everywhere. So then God came in and said, that's it, everyone has to leave now. And not one person got a single bite to eat. So then God went to the demons and said, did you enjoy this food? And obviously they said, no, because none of us got anything to eat. And, God said, right, that's it. Everyone can sort of leave now, go outside. And then it was the turn of the gods. So they were given exactly the same condition, that they weren't allowed to bend their elbows and that they had to sort of figure out a way of eating. And they used their intelligence and the concept of sacrifice in order to feed one another. So essentially their hands were like this, but they decided to feed one person and the other fed the other in return. So this was sort of the sacrifice that one person decided, the person opposite me is giving me food, and therefore why don't I do the same thing and feed the other person back? And it's my duty in order to, to feed him and to return this favour to him. So this, in this way the gods managed to feed each other, but still fulfilling the condition. And within 15 minutes, all the gods are full up, having eaten all the delicious food. And this is an example of sacrifice and pavayata, which we just looked at. So the next thing to consider is, how are you on your own going to consume all the wealth and the possessions and everything that you've been given? And often when you sit with, elder people, they say to you, we've had lots and lots of experiences, but at the end of the day, we've gathered so many possessions, we've gathered so much money, but all we actually really need is, 3 chapatis to fill our stomachs, and we're happy, or 4. And, why did we collect all these possessions? What did we gather these from? What was the purpose? And at that point, often people come to think, we've gathered all these things from society, we've enriched ourselves, we should now be giving something back. And if you give something back to society, often, you will definitely get that thing back in return. And that's basically a fundamental rule of the universe. So if we look at various types of people, some people are motivated by the thought of live and let live. And, some great people are described, and they're described as people who live to let live. So there's a big difference there. They live in order to make other people's lives better. And that's basically the example of what a great person is. Ordinary people will help others when it doesn't really affect their happiness, when it's not really a problem or when it's not too difficult for them. But, other people would not necessarily do that if it would make them suffer. So, for them it's sort of like a leisure activity. We won't suffer, so we might as well just help these people. But somebody, who really wants to do good will actually stop, and even if it causes them a little bit of hardship, they will do what they can in order to progress the lives of other people. Basically, a great person will then suffer themselves in order to help people, and they will, do the example of what the word pavayata means, to meet, greet, and do other good to people. So we then move on to what does the word dev mean. Now, dev comes from the word dyudata, and this has multiple meanings. The first meaning is to play. So there's various characteristics of God, and I'm going to go on to describe the 10 different characteristics. But the first one is one who considers life to be a game. So that person is called a dev. The whole world was created by sacrifice, and in the Upanishads they ask God, why was the world created? So often people ask, why was the world created? The Big Bang Theory and all the other different types of theories. So what our scriptures say is that in the start, God was alone, and he realized that there was something missing, so he created other people. And, he wasn't happy being alone, so he created more people. Then, people started to question, well, if there's more people, there began to be a fear between more and more people. So often, when you think about it, I do this all the time. If I'm in the house alone, I suddenly think, there's someone in the room, but there's nobody there, and you're just afraid that there'll be someone else there. And often, if there's 2 people together, one will fear the other, that they'll fear that one's stronger than the other, one's weaker than the other, often in a team exercise and that sort of thing. So when you fear sort of other people, there's also 2 French philosophers, I don't know if you've heard of Sartre and Camus, they both have said that the other is very dangerous. So often in our lives we think, what will another person think if we do this? We're worried about other people's opinions. So when another person comes about, then there's often fear. Even as I was saying in the instance when there's a strong person and a weak person, the strong person will fear that the weak person will suddenly become more strong than them and therefore overpower them, and the weak person will fear the stronger person because they realise that they're stronger than them. So both people are not necessarily carefree. They both have, tensions in their mind. And you see this with poor people, the poor man and the rich man. The poor man will be sad because in the examples that Drew often gives us of the people that go to the countryside and realise the difference between the rich man and the poor man, the rich man fears that he'll lose all his money, but the poor man fears that he doesn't have any money. So, there's always this fear when there's another person. So there's always a comparison of the haves and the have-nots. Therefore, what's the right thing to do? What should we do? The person on his own doesn't really like it, but the person who's got another person there is fearing the other person. So where is the right thing? Where's the balance? So our scriptures have basically said that we should look at life as a game, and when you're, playing a game, you should have good sportsmanship and see your life as a divine play and see the world as a divine play. In a game, you sort of come into in a relation with another person, but you're not necessarily afraid of them, and you all have your own personalities to play, therefore you're not afraid. So you should consider life as a game. Life's not a punishment, and it's a game. Basically, in our religion, we say that we have the rules of a game because every game needs rules, and therefore that's our religion. There can't be a game without rules, and if you play by the rules, then you'll be happy. Krishna Bhagwan's life is a true example of children as a game. Often you see the episodes, I'm sure if you watch Dwarkadesh or something, you see as a young boy, he used to see things, not take things too seriously. And often when you play a game and you take it too seriously, there's a lot of tension. You can't necessarily always win, you can't necessarily always lose, but you should have a good sportsmanship nature, and therefore you'll have the opportunity to learn from things if you're light-hearted about it. So in this way, in your life, you'll come through ups and downs, but you should see things in a positive light and try to gain whatever you can from it. The next aspect of a godlike character is one who has an urge to win. So there are two phrases related to this in Sanskrit, and the first one is Vijay Isha, and the second one is Jiji Isha. The first one means an urge to win, and the second is an urge to live. The latter is a common thing. Even an ant has the urge to live. If you grab a little insect, then it will stay with its tail, but it will maybe you hold the tail, but the front will run away. And why does it run away? Because it has the urge to live. It will try to save itself, and this is the urge to live. But one level higher than this is the urge to win. So this is an attitude that you should try to embody in your life, that you want to win in the world, and you want to be victorious against ignorance, victorious against discrimination, against bad activities, and against uncultured people. Because at the end of the day, life is similar to a war. It's a war against bad activities, a war against bad circumstances. Life's not always a bed of roses, and bad circumstances do come along, but you'd like to be victorious against them. And that's why you shouldn't accept defeat and fall down. You should always try to win against them, and that's the qualities of a div. Often, people go to God when bad things happen to them, and that's because, God is somebody who's overcome bad circumstances, and we try to get inspiration from God. And we try to, we worship God in order to try to become similar to them. The Vedas often talk about this, and the rishis have really powerful language in the Vedas, and anyone who's heard part of the Vedas or applied the Vedas to their life can never really be powerless, because they have this will to win. When people don't have the will to win in society, often they sort of become a little bit weak, and they don't have the strength within themselves in order to overcome circumstances. So in the last chapter of the Yajurveda, which is the 40th chapter, it's one of the Upanishads, and the first mantra says many different meanings, but it says Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam. And basically what that means, which is quite a beautiful meaning, is that everything that's here is yours only if you're the owner of it. So, you'll enjoy everything in the world if you're able to enjoy it, and if you become the owner of it. So, for example, if you're living as a slave in the world, it's not particularly pleasant, because say, for example, you have an expensive sofa in your house, and it's really beautiful, but you're not able to enjoy it, because if you're sort of the servant in the house, all you're worried about is how you're going to have to clean it. But if you can become the master of that sofa and sit down and enjoy it, you're able to derive pleasure from that. I sort of make jokes about having your BlackBerry. A lot of people become a slave to their BlackBerry. Rather than becoming a slave, you should be able to master it, and become an owner of your objects rather than becoming a slave to them. Objects often will tie you down and lead you down the wrong route. So when you become the owner of things, the world becomes a more beautiful place to you. Whereas when you become a slave to the objects, the world will become like a punishment to you, and you'll fall into bondage. So therefore, the moral of that is to become the owner. The third aspect of being a god is a relation. So one who learns how to interact in relations is a god. A relationship happens between two people, and how we interact with people and how we carry on our lives in society, which is multiple different relationships, is very important. So in the Ramayana, there's an example where the Rishi Valmiki was walking along a river one morning and he saw a couple of doves sitting. And obviously the Rishi Valmiki was a poet, so he suddenly saw a hunter shoot an arrow. So one of the doves fell on the ground and died, and the other dove started crying. So when the Rishi saw this, he had a lot of sorrow in his heart, and it came out, he wrote a small poem about this. So I won't say it in Sanskrit, I'll say it in English, the translation. Why did you do this? You have killed off one of the happy, loving couple of doves. Why have you done this wrong? Now you will not live long. So the way the Rishi saw this is that the hunter was powerful and the doves were weak. So he tried to teach the hunter that this was not necessarily the correct behaviour. The hunter was a human being and the doves were mere birds. And the hunter was strong because he had, his bow and arrows, but the doves had nothing to protect themselves. So in your relationships with other people, you should sort of consider this and consider how you interact with different people and where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And that's sort of the Valmiki's first meter in the Ramayana. So this is actually something that is quite important in society. Obviously, we had things like the riots in last year, and I personally do think that this is one of the biggest illnesses in our education system, is interacting with people. People can be so intelligent, but often don't necessarily know how to interact with people on a social level. And one of Guruji, when he went to Los Angeles, he was actually meeting with a professor there. And one of the professors actually said that the American government looked into this and realised that they teach so many things to their students, but they don't teach them how to interact and behave with other people. So now they've introduced a new course which is called Moral Studies, and this, teaches children how to respect their elders, how to interact with other people in society. And this is something that, in India, people are taught from when they're very young, how to respect their elders, to touch their feet, to, give your guests respect as well when they come to our house, how to say Jai Sri Krishna and welcome them. And often, these morals and behaviour aren't necessarily as in practice in the West. And we, an example of this is when the school in Los Angeles needed to put this into their education system, actually in a formal way of how to interact in a moral, in a better moral way with people in society. So, people can have excellent education. There's an example that Guruji has where there was a person, this is about sort of 25 years ago now, so it's a little bit different to now, but he completed his studies and become a doctor, and he was a gold medalist and had a first-class degree, and he thought that if he practiced in India, he wouldn't be able to earn much, so he decided to move to the United States, and he thought he'd get a lot of money in dollars, so he moved there, and he didn't get full citizenship, so he became a second-class citizen, or a green card holder. So this first-class citizen then became the first-class degree holder became a second-class citizen in the United States. And after he stayed there for about 3 years, his family back in India said that he should get married. So he went back to America, and previously what would happen in the newspapers, people would say that, oh, so-and-so green card holder has come back to, to the village, and lots of people would be interested in getting, he's here for a couple of months. And I mean, obviously it doesn't happen as much now, but it would say, that so-and-so has come back, this doctor has come back for a short period of time, he's interested in getting married, and it would say he's got a green card. So then, of course, if there was the phrase green card, there'd be a long line of girls who would form in order to be introduced to this guy. And obviously it doesn't happen as much anymore because, people with green cards are now forming a line to meet girls. It's the other way around. But back in the day, the lines would form and family would find him a nice, cultured, beautiful, well-educated girl from a good family, and they would get married, and the couple would then go to America. So the girl would have all these dreams that her husband is a first-class doctor, practicing in America, earning a good salary, and then she goes there with lots of dreams, but then on realising, when she gets there, she realises how many difficulties there are. He wakes up early in the morning and runs to work, has a Subway sandwich for lunch, and then comes back in the evening, and the poor girl waits for him until it's very late. And then he might even make her go to work due to financial situations, and she would have to work long hours, and all her dreams are then slowly getting shattered. She tolerates all of this for about 6 to 8 months, and then, at the end of the day, she's there alone. And when she goes back to India and speaks to her family and her friends, she'll say to them that she has a third-class husband. So a first-class doctor, a second-class citizen, and a third-class husband. They then have children, but the husband doesn't have much time for the children. He leaves early in the morning because he's a doctor and he has a tough schedule and runs by the clock. And he has to leave as soon as he gets his call. And when he leaves in the morning, the children are sleeping. And when he comes back home late at night, the children are sleeping. So every Sunday, the mother has to introduce the father to the children and say, children, this is your father. And he becomes a Sunday father and a fourth-class father. So he's a first-class doctor, a second-class citizen, a third-class husband, and a fourth-class father. And the line goes on. You know, he becomes a fifth-class son. He doesn't necessarily have interaction with his parents and becomes a sixth-class son-in-law and a seventh-class friend. So all in all, the relationships, you know, are breaking down. So if he had learnt to behave and interact with his life, and you know, things would have been so different. Things would have been different if he'd interacted with his children in a different way and behaved in society in a different manner. So there's that example. And on the other hand, our rishis have written that the best way to interact with people is to try and make everyone happy and not to make people sad. But this is actually quite difficult to do in practice because, you know, there's two extremes. You'll either try to make everybody really happy to your detriment and then you'll become sad, or, you know, you won't care about anyone else and you'll just not care that they become sad. So the happy medium is to, you know, to find a nice balance whereby you treat everyone well and courteously, but at the same time you don't make yourself sad. So in every family there's obviously one dictator, there always is, you know, that you have to do everything that he says, otherwise everyone else will you know, it just won't work. And on the other extreme, there's the person that will do everything to keep other people happy and they will get hurt. So the person that finds the art of not hurting another, but at the same time not letting themselves get hurt, is similar to a god. So the fourth characteristic is somebody who has light. So one who lives in light is a god. And in society there's a lot of darkness and ignorance, and people have stopped considering who they are. You know, often people don't necessarily know their identity, and you know, they're not really identifying with themselves anymore. You're not just a name or the body that you have. So, you know, the obvious questions that come up are, who am I? You know, why am I here? And people don't necessarily always think about these things anymore, and their lives become aimless. So once this type of darkness comes into their life, you know, they start to become depressed or frustrated, and, you know, they lose their aims in life. So in order to combat this, the things that we're encouraged to do is to find courage. So there's two types of courage. There's the courage to go forward, and then the courage to be original. So you need to have the attitude that you want to move ahead in your life and that you want to do something yourself. The majority of people don't necessarily have this. So there's an example of Kacharlal, the fictional character that Drew often mentions. And he joined the army. As soon as he joined the army in India, the war broke out, and therefore he had to go to war. But what he did, he was quite clever. He always stood behind the general. So he followed him like he was his shadow. You know, day or night, wherever the general went, Kacharlal used to follow. So this general thought that he was wonderful, because wherever he went, he would follow him. He was right behind him. He would say anything, and Kacharlal would say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. And he stood in attention with a salute in the way that he wanted. So once the war finished, the country had won, and the general was given a medal, and the general also ensured that Kacharlal also got a medal. And the general said that wherever he went, Kacharlal always stayed with him, day and night, without questioning. And Kacharlal was very happy, and he also got the medal. After they both got the award, they were walking back to the headquarters, the army headquarters, and the general said, Kacharlal, I just got one question for you. Just why is it that day or night, without questioning, you stood behind me throughout the whole time? What was your reason for this? And Kacharlal said that his wife had told him to stand behind the general because she was very clever, and she knew that in a war, the general never dies, only the soldiers die. So if you stand behind the general, you won't die. So after that, the Kacharlal went back to his hometown, and the people in the town gave him a ceremony, because obviously he'd just come back from war and he'd won an award. And the newspaper reported about him and all the great things that he'd done, you know, because he'd stayed behind the general, he'd won this medal. And there was a poor soldier who was on the battlefront, and you know, there was nothing printed about him in the newspaper at all. And the soldier had told everyone what had happened to him during the war, how many people he'd saved, how many people, you know, how many enemies' heads he'd beheaded. And everyone gathered around Kacharlal and asked him what he'd done, you know, because the other soldier had cut so many heads of the enemy off. You know, what had Kacharlal done at this whole time? And because he had to say something, Kacharlal answered that he cut off the 24 legs. Now, obviously, people were wondering, why did you cut their legs off? Their heads had already been cut off. And he said, well, what can I do? The other soldiers have already cut their heads. So this is an example of just following others and not being able to, use your own courage to move ahead yourself. So if a person wants to bring light in their own life, they can't stay behind in the back and be a shadow, because where there is shadow, there's darkness. Therefore, light has to always stay in front, and it always goes in front. So whoever has the courage to go forward in life always will have light in their life. So this is someone who is a godlike person, someone who stays ahead and has courage. The fifth characteristic is praise and glory. So one who gets authentic praise and glory for authentic reasons is a god. Praise happens often for many reasons, sometimes because people want something, from you, but someone who actually praises for authentic reasons, this is someone who is godlike. The sixth characteristic is bliss. Someone who lives their life with genuine happiness is a godlike person. Because the majority of us only know one type of happiness, and that's happiness from material objects, we run after these material objects, and we don't have the originality anymore. There's something that we've stopped considering, and that's emotional happiness. So when you do something, when you do something from your heart, there is a lot of emotional happiness. So there's the example of a mother of a poor family whose children are hungry, and she's also hungry, and she has 200 grams of sweets in her hand, and her 4 children, she gives the sweets to her children first, and she keeps 1 spoon of it on the side for herself to have, but the children are so hungry, and they're so much in enjoyment of this food that they keep asking for another spoon, and so she keeps giving another spoon, and then they say, oh, another spoon, and at the end of it, there's none left. But the mother has so much happiness, despite the fact that she hasn't had any herself, and this is emotional happiness. Emotional happiness is a lot greater than material happiness. Often, it's a lot more important in life. I mean, I had an example where I taught a girl who didn't speak a word of Italian, and it was her one aim was to get into Oxford and to learn Italian. So I taught her from the beginning, and she was paying me sort of very little money, but it was the pleasure that I got at the end of the fact that she sent me a text message to say, look, Meera, I got into Oxford. That was a lot more powerful than the money that she was paying me, and that's an example of emotional happiness over material happiness, the feeling of happiness over the money. So then you've got those 2 levels, but then you've got the highest level of happiness, which is the bliss of the soul. And most people at the moment are in the happiness of the material level, where, they want another car, they want another house, and from that they gain happiness. But it's quite hard to get, go above and beyond the emotional happiness and to get the bliss of the soul. So that's something that we should aspire to. And the next characteristic, which is the 7th characteristic, is pride. And this is where there's true pride, not pride just because, you think that you're better than another, but pride where you actually do something where you're really, say, for example, you're number 1 in the school, in class, because you have the ability to do it, not because maybe, you cheated or because you've actually made it, and that's a reason to be proud. A true devotee, for example, is proud that he belongs to God, and that's pride as well. So once you get to this level, that's true pride. The 8th characteristic is a dream. So this isn't daydreams or, when you're sleeping at work and daydreaming. This is, or the daydreams or the, dreams you have at night. It's when you're a visionary. So, people that study management often say that leaders should be dreamers. And, if a politician doesn't dream or doesn't have a vision, then his country can't progress. And, how will that be the best for his people? So a politician, for example, should not continue to look in the past. He should look in the future. And this applies to any leader, whether it's a company leader, in management, a politician, or even a religious leader. They should be a dreamer. They should have dreams that they want to do something in society. And only if you have dreams, really, can they actually come true. If you don't have dreams, then you have nothing that, that you can make come true. The other characteristic, which is the 9th characteristic, is grace. One who increases the grace of life is a god. So when you come into the world, the whole world laughed and you cried, when you first came out. But you should actually leave the world in such a way that you will laugh and the whole world will cry. And this type of person will increase the grace of their life and therefore be godlike in character. There is a saying that when we Kalam pavitram janani kurata vasunda punya tichayana. And that means one person whose birth leads to his family and the earth being purified, and the fact that his mother will think that she has given birth to a great child. This type of person is a god. And then the final meaning, which is the 10th characteristic, is someone who is in motion. So someone who is always moving. These are characteristics that we should try to have, because someone always has thoughts and qualities that they try to develop, and they're moving forwards with that, and they're advancing themselves. They will certainly achieve those goals and those aims, similar to having dreams, being able to move forward with those. So, these will certainly happen. So I'll just run through those characteristics again. Number 1 is someone who considers life to be a game. Number 2 is the person who has the urge to win. Number 3 is someone who knows the art of relations. Number 4 is someone who has light. Number 5, someone who has praise and glory. Number 6, someone who knows how to live in bliss. Number 7, someone who has true pride. Number 8, someone who dreams and is a visionary. Number 9, someone who has grace. And number 10, someone who is always moving forward. So these, Sri Krishna has shown us in the last few verses that the world was created by sacrifice. That was in verse 10. And then in verse 11, how, with sacrifice you can foster the gods, and gods will then foster you through this energy, the positive energy. And in the next verse, he'll describe the consequences when someone does what they want rather than, what they should do in a sacrifice. So if we move on to